Hi friends! This tutorial is an easy watercolor flowers for beginners. I hope you will enjoy it and learn something from it. Let's start! So this is an easy watercolor flower composition for beginners, where we are going to be using some hard cheese paper, 100% cotton, some Winsor & Newton Professional Series watercolors, and some Princeton brushes. I will be using a Filbert brush and an Heritage round brush size 6, the Heritage 4050, and the Princeton Filbert brush, it's a size 8. I have my 2 cups of water for warm color and cold colors, and I have a cloth to clean my brushes and remove some water. Since this is a watercolor flower composition, a tutorial for beginners, I thought of using a smaller size of paper. This is smaller than an A4, as you can see, because I thought that for beginners sometimes starting with an A4 can be even feel a bit overwhelming, and therefore I would recommend, if you have such a small size of paper, maybe can be easier to start with, or if you have an A4, maybe you can, for the first time you're gonna start painting, you can maybe focus on just a side of your paper and not using the whole A4 size in case it feels too big. So let's start this tutorial with the composition of the roses. The idea that I start with is having the roses in the center of this paper, and then I'm going to add the leaves, the foliage, and additional elements of this composition around the main composition that is the roses. So the first thing that I do is to rinse my Filbert brush. I started this with the Filbert brush into water. My colors are already all wet. I've added a bit of water before starting this video, like this, in order to have all the colors ready to be used. And the way I'd like to have these roses is a composition with warm colors of orange, red, maybe a bit of pink and yellow. So I start by taking a bit of Opera Rose. This is a bright pink from Winsor & Newton. And I'd like this rose to be with a touch of orange, let's say. So I take this Winsor orange. I like this color very much. And we can start to paint these roses. To do this, we start from the center of the rose. We know that the rose has a circular shape, round shape. And as you see, I keep adding, while the painting is still wet, a bit of different colors. When I've created this center part of the rose, I rinse off a bit of pigment into the cup of water, and I started to create these round shapes with the Filbert brush. I rinse water and I go around. I want to keep in mind that the rose has a round shape, so I will go with my Filbert brush around, and I like the effect of removing the pigment, so there is this effect of the pigments into the water. And now I have a bit of pink, I add a bit of orange, and I can do this bleeding of colors into water, and I keep following this round shape of the rose where I am making these petals, and I'm going a bit with my feelings, so it doesn't have to be perfect. This is a loose style watercolor composition. And as you can see, I am giving pressure and then releasing the pressure with the Filbert brush. I think at the moment this rose is... I like the size of the rose, and usually I like with roses to take a bit more, in this case opera rose, and go back where the water is still, where the petals are not dried yet, and add a bit of color. In this case I am adding a bit of opera rose, a bit of orange, and I love these bleeding moments that are happening on this flower. So you can choose to do this, you can choose not to do this, but I think it's part of the beauty of watercolor. Okay, if I am satisfied with the size of this rose and the effect I was able to give to this rose, I can start to paint the second rose, which I'd like it to be with similar colors but maybe with a bit more red. So I'm gonna take a bit of this red. This is a Scarlet Lake color, and I'd like all the flowers to be in the same color scheme, so I will add a bit of orange as well. And let's start from the center. I'd like this rose to be pointing more towards the right side, therefore I'm going to start from the center and keeping in mind to add more petals towards the left side. Adding a bit of opera rose because I want these roses to be with similar colors that are calling each other. And the way I created these petals with this filbert brush is always the same. As you can see, I rinse off the amount of extra pigment, and then I press and I release, and maybe I twist a bit the brush. Where we have still water, I like the bleeding effect that we can achieve by adding a bit of red. This is beautiful Scarlet Lake into the petals, and then we rinse like more opera rose. And as you are noticing, I'd like these petals to be small because we have a small size of paper, so of course what we are creating needs to be balanced. We are giving a round shape of this rose, and as you can see, we have created a rose that is pointing towards the right side, upper right side of this paper, and they are touching each other, and there is this rose is touching the left rose, and they are bleeding into each other in a beautiful central part of the composition. I'd like at this point to add another rose because I see that there is more space in this part of the paper, in the lower part of the paper, and I think maybe this rose can be more towards the yellow color, and I'm gonna mix some yellow lemon dip with a bit of orange, because as I said before, I want always the color scheme of these three roses to be the colors to be quite consistent with each other. So here we have orange and rose, here we have opera rose and Scarlet Lake. Here we're gonna have a bit of orange with yellow, and then we can add maybe some bleeding parts into the red color. I'm gonna do this rose centered, so I'm gonna start from the center part of the rose, so just a few strokes where you just touch the paper with the filbert brush, and then we can start to add these other petals by rinsing off the water into the water, the pigment, so I have less pigment into the onto the brush. And then I am adding petals all over because I said that I want this rose to be centered. And I am changing basically the values of this color. Basically it means that I'm starting from a quite concentrated in pigment center part of the rose, and then I'm removing pigment, I'm having more water. I'm achieving different values of a similar color. But not to be boring, we wanted to add a bit of red. So I'm gonna bleed some red into the petals that are still wet. And then we keep creating these petals. They're gonna be more orange here because I want to create this homogeneous effect. And I always use this filbert brush that is small, and I think for beginners, when we start painting, it might be easier to use a smaller size of brushes, smaller sizes of paper where to paint, and therefore I've decided to use this brush. And then I like to add a few strokes of yellow. Some areas might be already a bit dry. But where it's not dry yet, we can still achieve this wet on wet, and where basically the colors are blending together. I'd like to add a bit more orange in the center part. Here, like this. Beautiful. I like it very much. Now we can start to paint our leaves. So to paint the leaves we could use a filbert brush. I also like to use this Princeton Heritage size 6 round brush. I usually like to use this one at least for the central part of the leaves, and then maybe I go a bit with the feeling, either to use this one for the leaves, or I use the filbert brush. To start with, we're gonna use some green, so we take a bit of green on our brush. And in order to have a cohesive composition, to this green, this is a sap green, which is a beautiful bright green. I'd like to add a bit of red and orange that we have already in our color palette, because it will mute a bit this green, and it will give more homogeneous color, because it goes very well along with the orange shades that we gave to these roses. So, for example, some leaves could go from here into here. So I'm just using very light pressure and using the point part of this round brush. And actually for the leaf in itself, I would like to use this Princeton filbert brush. So I'm going to use this green that I've already mixed with a bit of red. I need a bit more, so I'm gonna mix a bit more on my palette. I've added a bit too much here. Okay, here we go. And then with this color, I'm gonna start to create the leaves. It's pretty simple to create leaves with a filbert brush. We have already a round shape, so we're going to point maybe the side of the brush onto the paper and press and then release. And we can have this sort of round shape leaves, or we can do the opposite, go in this direction. So pressing and then releasing, and we have these sort of leaves that are very simple, and you can add a bit of red more into the green in order to have a different hue. So you change the hue, the color basically. You can rinse. And then at this point, what I like to do is to take a bit more of the green, sap green, and let it bleed into our leaves. While the leaves are still wet. For example, in the same way, we can add other leaves going, for example, into this direction. Also, with a very light pressure, we are creating the second stem for these leaves, and then we can mix a bit of sap green with our red. For example, Scarlet Lake, or a bit of the mixture we already created for the first flowers, and then by side, and then pressure and release. And as you can see, our leaves are always following where, let's say, the stem is going. Here I feel that a leaf is missing. Here I can create another one. I can rinse off some color and have different values. This is, I think, the simplest way to create leaves. You can add some, if you like, some sap green into the bleeding of of the leaves. If you like, you don't have to. And if I look at the composition, I can think, for example, I feel there is a space here where I can add other small leaves. So that's what I do. And I always use this pressure and release with the side of the filbert brush, because I think for beginners this is one of the easiest way you can actually create leaves. I think we can add the leaf here. And for example, we can add a bit of green leading into these leaves. If, for example, you have added some green and it was already to dry the leaf, for example, in this case I don't like very much how it looks, you can add a bit of water onto your brush and you can take the excessive amount of pigment and stretch it. So these 3 roses with their leaves are complete. We can, for example, add some additional small flowers. I'm thinking I'd like to have them in blue shade. So I'm gonna mix on my palette a bit of this phthalo turquoise. And for these small flowers, I really want to make them loose style and more of a round shape. So I will use still this filbert brush. And for example, I can have these blue flowers going towards this direction. So the way I use this filbert brush to do it is to really touch the paper with the side of the filbert brush. Or I can create a bigger petal, let's say, with the whole belly of the brush. I can change the value by adding, for example, water and removing some of the pigment. But this is, for example, a way we can add some simple flowers that we can then connect to the main composition through their stem. So I take the round brush and I connect them. To the center. For example, like this. This could be, and I feel here something is missing, so I will add a small flower here and a small flower here, and maybe one here. So I do the same of flowers like this. Then maybe this one we'll do it darker, like this. And at this point I'd like to have a little bit more flowers, because I see the composition is heavy in this part, so I will add a bit of blue flowers here. This composition, this tutorial is focusing on using simple colors. We are not mixing too many colors together, but we can change the value of the colors by adding water, or better said, removing pigment. We are focusing on learning how to use a filbert brush and a round brush. The size of the paper is small, therefore we should not be overwhelmed by the amount of white paper we have in front of us. And we are focusing on understanding how the wet technique works, and understanding how to mix color. We are learning through this composition, this tutorial, how to give some very basic shapes to petals and to leaves even. I step back, I look at the composition, and I like it, so this composition is done. I hope you like this easy watercolor flower composition for beginners. If so, think about subscribing. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you, see you next time.